it off. I know we have a lot to cover over the next hour. So I'd like to welcome Lisa Grimes and Michelle Proctor to the select group and the discussion of the power of networking and mentorship. Michelle Proctor is Chief of Staff at SAS. She actually also leads the Women's Initiative Network. I met Michelle back in 2019, and she has been a fierce ally for the select group with Lee Wallace and I building out the Women in Business program. She's given us a lot of best practices on how SAS leads their WIN program, as well as introduced us to many influencers in the industry. So I thank you so much, Michelle, for all that you've done for me personally, and also for spending this time with us today.
Yes, my pleasure.
Yeah.
So I'll introduce Lisa. And so for me, Lisa is sort of on my left on the screen for everybody. So as you're sort of looking at your screen, so Lisa Grimes, pretty exhaustive list of accomplishments, successful business executive, author, speaker, executive, and life coach. Serves as a fractional CEO for Pure Thread Technologies, is also the managing director of Habergeon. And so in addition to owning our own coaching business. And so we've got some accomplished guests here today. And I just want to extend our gratitude to Lisa and Michelle for carving out the time. Have had the opportunity to chat with both of them. And I think, for everybody on the call, regardless of if you're part of our Women in Business program or not, I think it'll be a valuable hour spent. And so we're excited to jump into some Q&A with Michelle and Lisa, and then we've certainly left some open time at the end for Q&A as well. So Missy, I'll kind of turn it over to you to start, and then we can kind of go back and forth from there.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, I'd actually like Michelle and Lisa just to open up the discussion with your story of how you met and have built this relationship. So I'll pass it to you to talk about the Guatemala story.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite stories to talk about, but I don't get to talk about it very often. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. We met in what I would say the oddest of places. Definitely did not go to Guatemala with anticipation of meeting a mentor and friend for life. I found myself standing up and volunteering to go and help impoverished children in an area of Guatemala that was so impoverished. They called it Zone 18, which is the most poorest area of the whole country. And I think most of the people in that area, crime was really what sustained them, which, going to a place like that, there were some stipulations. Number one, we couldn't do anything to stand out. So in terms of like having jewelry or wearing makeup or name brand clothing, just the basics is what we were allowed to bring. And Lisa may laugh at me. I chose to bring like half the clothes that I normally would. And for those that know me outside, I know there's some SAS people on here too. It is not like me to go out of the house without wearing makeup, shoes, jewelry is big for me. So for me to go to another country for a whole week without makeup and jewelry is like a big step. I also had decided to dedicate half my packing area of my suitcase to soccer balls and candy for these children who I knew that I would be meeting. So I had even less than most people on the trip. We won't be able to get into all the details of all that great stuff, but 2 days into the trip, we were driving back from the impoverished area where we were serving. It was basically a student center where women and men would send their students before and after school so they could have like their 12-hour work days. So we were sent there to basically help the students in day-to-day activities. And at the end of our shift, we were driving home and the bus that we were on broke down. We had an armed guard with us, so we felt kind of safe. But Lisa just was getting on the bus and asked if she could sit next to me. And of course, I said, yeah, please do. I had no idea who she was. And the most beautiful thing about her is she asked me about myself before letting me know of her greatness. Thank goodness, because I don't know if I would have been able to talk after that. So she listened for probably 45 minutes of me just tell her. I was like, well, how far back do I go? I think I started in high school. I told her about, high school, college, working at NASA, my seeking my electrical engineering degree, completing my studies, going from NASA to IBM, and how I had just transitioned to moving to SAS. And then at the end of that, I asked her about herself, and she probably only spoke for 5 or 10 minutes, but just like the little bio that Tom read, it says a lot in 5 or 6 sentences. And at the end of that conversation, I'm pretty sure I asked you, I think I did. I said, will you be my mentor? I just kind of knew, and it was like waiting for somebody to answer a marriage proposal, like, please say yes, because I knew I needed her. And I knew that her experience could be beneficial to me. And of course, she took me under her wing, and there have been countless opportunities of me coming to her with opportunities that are presented to me, and without guiding me in one way or the other, she's been instrumentally beneficial in giving me the extra push that I need to be able to say yes to the opportunities as they come along.
That's so amazing. I love that. Lisa, what is your take on that story and, approach to that conversation?
Well, a lot happens when you're stuck on a bus in pitch black darkness for 3 hours with an armed guard saying you may not get off the bus.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I have my kids are all grown, they're adults, but I used to have the best conversations when they were driving and they could look ahead, or even before they could drive, when I was driving and they could look ahead, you'd get conversations that you might not otherwise get. And so Michelle and I covered a lot of territory in those 3 hours. And I would say for both of us, within a handful of minutes, there was a connection. And so it worked. Because of all the travel that I did then, I had missed all of the prep meetings for this particular trip. So when I showed up to get on the plane, I didn't really know who I was going with. And so it was a pleasant surprise to have been really blessed to sit beside Michelle and to get to know her in that 3-hour period. And I guess, as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah. And I like to say that I went there expecting to give to these kids, which I was able to do. There's so many stories that we could tell you. I wish we had time, but the thing that I did not expect was to receive more than I gave. And, let that just be a little bit of a seed for you, regardless of what you're doing in life or at home. If you have an opportunity to give and you go there expecting to give, sometimes you get the biggest blessings that you would never even expect if you just open yourself up to the opportunity. Because before then, I would have never. And as a matter of fact, when I stood up to volunteer, my husband jerked me back down. Like, what are you doing? You're going to leave me for a whole week with the kids? Yeah. But yet I had the courage to move forward when I felt pushed. And had I not done that, I certainly can't say we would have never had the opportunity to meet, because things often turn out, but that particular opportunity had opened up a lifetime for me.
Yeah, that's great advice. Be open to opportunities for sure. Michelle, something you mentioned, I knew I needed her and I knew I needed her experience. What did you hear from Lisa that made you want to ask her to be your mentor?
Yeah, just the life experiences that she had for the most part, the successful career path and the authenticity in which she was able to live her life out, just your faith and your principles, the thing that guides you, drove you in your career. And I knew I wanted that too. I wanted to have, I wanted to mirror a lot of the qualities that I saw in you. And I've been able to successfully do that just by developing a relationship. And I will caveat, any mentoring relationship has to truly start out with an authentic liking for each other. And it was never me looking at her and saying, oh, what can you help me with? In fact, it was more like, oh goodness, I know you could help me with a lot of stuff. How am I going to help you?
You have helped me in a tremendous number of
even
ways.
in that, there have been lots of opportunities where I've been able to open doors or make connections or help in some way, just as we're having conversation and things unfold.
Yeah, that's great. And I definitely want to talk more about that, of how to balance of giving and receiving. So through a 9-year relationship, Lisa, what were some things that Michelle did maybe that really encouraged you to continue mentorship with her and investing your time with her?
Well, Michelle is really the ideal mentee, and I could talk for the rest of the hour on this, but I sometimes need help remembering things, so I just spelled out ideal. One, she has integrity in what she does, and so we were able to develop a trusting relationship and have conversations across a wide variety of topics. She was dependable. When we set a time to meet, she was there. She wasn't making excuses or running 10 minutes late or whatever. And I'm not saying we all have things that are emergencies. We also have things that we don't prioritize, but she prioritized our time together, and she came prepared for us to have a discussion. She didn't come to have a complaint session. She was always eager to encourage and empower others. And I think you're seeing that in some of the work that she is doing and just trying to share the knowledge that she has learned from the WIN group at SAS with the select group. She wants to share what she knows. Michelle just mentioned, authentic. It works both ways. If you're going to really have a meaningful mentoring relationship, and if it's not going to be meaningful, why bother? But if you're going to do that, then the cards have to be on the table, because otherwise you're not going to really be able to help people reach their full potential. So we have covered topics, professional, personal, and from A to Z. Yeah. And Michelle doesn't try to put on airs or try to say, well, I heard this happened to somebody. She just puts it on the table. And then she is eager to learn. She is what I would call a lifelong learner. She wants to talk about discussions or talk about good books or talk about best practices. And then she wants to go and try to implement them or have a follow-up conversation and share it with others. And it really couldn't go without saying, and it doesn't fit an ideal other than maybe ideals and put an S. She's a superstar in that she always wants to give more than she receives. So she'll say, well, I just don't know what I could do, while she's done 10 things. I'll just give you one example of many. She arranged to throw the book launch party for Remember Who You Are. So SAS hosted us in their auditorium and live stream for a book launch party. And that was because of Michelle and her desire to give back and not just take from a mentor-mentee relationship. And so it is a two-way street. So all of those things and many more, but I won't cover any more of the alphabet.
That was so thoughtful of you. She didn't share her answers with me in advance. That's
Notice
sweet.
I skipped that one.
I love that ideal, the model mentee.
Yeah, get your little pedestal.
There we go. Okay.
Well, that's really good. Do you think, and this is open for both of you, you both have been mentors and mentees, but do you think that relationship ever has an expiration date, or, you know, what are your thoughts around that?
For me personally, no. I mean, I with Lisa, I know it's going to be a lifelong relationship, but that does bridge into some of the other relationships where I've had with others, where sometimes somebody is brought into your life for a season, and you kind of have to know when to let go. And it's sometimes not obvious. I mean, there have been times where we were talking just prior to this, where maybe you have a mentee who has risen up the ranks and they no longer had the time that they had at one point. And you know, that's okay. It's wonderful that you've helped them succeed. And there's never any jealousy in any of my mentor-mentee relationships and helping them. I want to further them as much as I can. And most of the time they want to pour into me and further me as best they can. And they also see the ripple in the water that happens, because Lisa helps me and I help, you know, maybe a person in high school who's getting prepared to go to college, who has their whole life ahead of them. And she's got a 40-year network. I've got a 30-year network. So now I'm giving a 70 years worth of a network to a 17-year-old girl just starting out on her own journey. So when I look at it that way, my answer would be with Lisa, definitely it's a lifelong relationship. But there will be opportunities with other people where they come and go, and you got to be open to allowing them to exit, because there'll be doors that open for other people to come in and kind of fill that void.
Right. Sometimes it's for a particular season. Sometimes it is there is a reason. And, you know, that is also, it points to one of the reasons why it's good to often have more than one mentor. Mm-hmm. And so you have mentor relationships that are at different places and potentially for different reasons. Some people look to mentors more for their professional growth. Others want what I call more of a whole person mentoring relationship. And those tend to last longer than a particular professional relationship might.
Mm-hmm. So you're suggesting that, you know, for people to have, they can have more than one mentor, and they can, how would they go about choosing the right mentor for them if it's that season of life that they're looking for a certain skill set, or how would you, you know, suggest people navigate that?
Yeah, well, two ways. Number one, sometimes you can be targeted. For example, when I was starting or stepping into the leadership position for the Women's Initiative Network, I realized that taking the time to seek out like an executive sponsor. So for us at SAS, it was the head of HR. Seeking her out and having her become our executive sponsor and explaining things. Like, for example, we had gone 10 years of doing things on volunteer time, and the leadership team would basically fund everything. We never had a budget, but nobody had ever asked her to give us a budget. So taking the time to seek out her as a mentor and just lay out the plan and just say, hey, would you consider giving us a budget? There was no hesitation after that. It's just nobody had taken the time to ask. So definitely seeking it out is one. The other, I would say, sometimes happens accidentally. And I can give an example of this. When I was very early on in my career at IBM, one of the things that I picked this up from my mom, who is a psychologist. She encouraged me to put candy on my desk because it would bring people in and make them feel comfortable. And one of the things I started noticing is if I made mental note of what a person's favorite candy was and filled my bowl, or made sure that there were 1 or 2 pieces in, that somehow that opened doors for me to have more authentic conversations. And I say that story because there was an upline, like a very, very high level executive. And I was like 3 years into my career. And he walked by my office and noticed there was Snicker bars in there, and that happened to be his favorite candy. And every day he would stop by my office and pick up a candy bar. And I mean, we're just talking little mini candy bars, but the fact that I had this really, really high level executive taking time out of his schedule to stop by my office, I used it as an opportunity to get to know him, like authentically ask him questions about his children, his career. He wasn't from the United States, so about his culture and where he was from. And that helped me develop the first, I would say, executive sponsor relationship that at the time I didn't even know that I was building. So the advice here is when you can authentically run into somebody, and by no means was I wanting to be manipulative, and he may have been making decisions on who to lay off within the organization, and I don't think my name was not on that list because he stopped by and got candy every day, but he did know who I was. And then when people would say comments about my work, my ethics, he would remember that. And so I think that helped when it came time to for opportunities for growth, for people to take leadership positions. I do think that I was tapped earlier than I would have originally been because I took the time to nurture and culture that one relationship.
Yeah, that's Michelle, you sort of mentioned sponsorship. One, I think if I put candy on my desk now, knowing my office mates or my kids, I wouldn't get them out of here. So
yes, exactly. Then there's that.
But Lisa, I'm curious what what is sponsorship, and how is that different than mentorship, since Michelle mentioned that?
Yeah, great question, Tom. Well, a sponsor is someone within your own organization that is really going to stick up for you behind closed doors. Someone who's going to say, Michelle should be on the list for that next promotion. Michelle should be considered. Michelle should get this next project. It is a person that you have developed a working relationship within your company. And I'll give an example in a minute that has stood with me. But a mentor might well be someone within your organization, but oftentimes is not necessarily someone within your organization. And one of the things that struck me as a way to differentiate those two, because I think sometimes people mix sponsorship, mentorship, coaching, all of these things get kind of tossed around as one thing, but it was consider a mentor as your high school guidance counselor who can really help you say, well, these are your strengths. These are schools that you might possibly want to apply to or consider or visit, and consider your sponsor to be the admissions office at the school you want to go to. And that just really, settles it in a lot of ways. Mentors can help push you along and nudge you to go for the opportunity, and even help with interview prep and those sorts of things, but typically are not in a position to make the job offer or that promotion offer.
Got it. Yeah, that's interesting. So, Michelle or Lisa, I guess in your estimation, mentorship is sort of, you both have talked about sort of that two-way street or two-way door. I know I'm going off script here a little bit, but so is sponsorship as sort of identified as a mentor? You clearly asked Michelle, Lisa, to be your mentor.
Yeah.
Is this something that's you're asking a sponsor to act as your sponsor? Is this sort of a nurtured relationship, akin to the Snickers bar, or?
Yeah, well, I certainly didn't do it on purpose with the Snickers bar, but but I have used it as an example for others. I mean, it's something that it's really all about finding a connection with somebody, and there's also some kind of unwritten rules between high-level executive and individual contributors. A lot of times in the school that I come from, you typically don't have the highest level executives like going out to lunch with an individual contributor. It's a lot of, well, number one, they don't necessarily have time for it, but it's typically considered taboo. And I remember when I stepped into my current role, I moved from a manager of maybe 12 people to being the right-hand individual for the executive that I support, and our organization is about 350. I remember being told by a member of my team that I could no longer be invited to lunch, of course, unless I was paying for it, and then that's a different story. But it's because you're on kind of a different level, and the trust is different, and sometimes they're afraid to say things that you may be able to bring back to the leadership team. So I kind of got on a little bit of a tangent, but it's not something that you necessarily go out and seek. I need you to be my sponsor. It typically just happens. And I know throughout my entire career, I started in 92. So I'm going on 30 years now. Every single promotion I've ever been given, I didn't think I deserved, first of all, and I probably shouldn't say that out loud, but I was pushed by someone, and in my case, it's always been males because of the male-dominated industry that I work in. I've been offered the job before I felt that I was truly ready, and I've had people like Lisa who I could go to and say, "Look, I'm like a swan on a lake. Like, it looks like I'm gliding along, but my legs underneath are kicking like crazy. I don't belong here, and I'm afraid that they're going to find out any second." And having mentors like Lisa along the way who have been able to help me just kind of understand that you wouldn't be invited to the table if they didn't want you to sit at it. You have something to say, so pull up a chair and be a part of the conversation. And that has been instrumental, just in helping me have the confidence to sit at the table and speak up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it sounds like, your mentor and Lisa really helping you to, put yourself out there and put yourself in those situations. That's awesome. So Lisa, maybe, since it sounds like your dynamic with Michelle, being her mentor, any sponsors for you in your career? Your career is really impressive. So any sponsors that have helped you along the way, or maybe helped you understand or see something that you didn't see for yourself?
Yes, I had one sponsor in particular. I spent most of my early career in the pharmaceutical industry, and at that point in time was they were the two both that I think of were in pharmaceutical industry, high-level executives that took an interest in me and helped nudge me along with books I should read, or courses like going to Center for Creative Leadership, or going to spend a summer at Harvard on executive marketing, because my training is in STEM. I'm a pharmacist by training. So if I was going to continue broadening my horizons and not have the time to go get a marketing degree, you know, saying, well, let's find a great program and go. And I know that they were the ones behind closed doors mentioning my name. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to have moved up in the organization as readily. I don't think back in the 80s, sponsorship was a term, at least if it had been, I was not aware of it, but that's exactly what both of these men in two different companies were for me. They saw some potential and helped me grow into it by pushing and by making recommendations.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, when you recognize, and I know this is a little bit off, but when you recognize that that person or those people were sponsors for you, was there a point in, you know, reflecting in your careers that you look back and say, you know, I may not have seen it happening at the time, but, you know, looking back and reflecting back, I recognize that I was in a situation where there were folks, you know, acting as my sponsor.
Yes, definitely. For me, Jim in particular, he unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but he actually advised, even though he had been my sponsor for 2 or 3 promotions at that particular company, he, because of his network, had an opportunity to suggest me for an executive position for a startup company, and he thought that it was in my best interest. So I guess at that point he kind of switched from sponsor to mentor, because it was, again, based on trust. Obviously, he was really trying to look out for my personal interest, and he made the recommendation, and they barely interviewed me. They just said, this man recommended you, so we're wondering if you want the job. And that's the power of a sponsor, because he had an incredible track record himself. And it was years after that, Tom, so great insight. It was years after it that I look back on that, but continued long after he even retired to reach out to him. And I still reach out to his wife on occasion to check on her. And just to really to show gratitude, because he propelled my career in ways that I could have never imagined.
Yeah, that's great. So we talked a little bit about power of mentorship, power of sponsorship. I think another ship that is often talked about is allyship. And so just, again, curious, I'll sort of open it up to either one of you, you know, your interpretation or the difference of allyship between, you know, sponsorship and mentorship.
Yeah, I mean, I can probably take this one because I do a lot of this at SAS. It's really all about skills, knowledge, and then your network. And there's a couple of different ways. Number one, you can transfer trust in individuals and make recommendations for them. And you can do this in many ways: job recommendations or recommendations to be on boards. There's various levels that you can push people. Another thing that I have found is listening and speaking up is extremely important. And I now have found myself within a position within SAS where I can listen and pay attention and acknowledge when there are inequities. For example, I do a lot of hiring for the organization, and 100% of the time, I don't want to frustrate anyone, but 100% of the time, a male will always negotiate for himself. And more often than not, he's asking for more than he deserves. And this is risk management and banking. So it may not parallel to your industry, but what I have noticed is women, I mean, maybe 15 or 20% of the time will negotiate for themselves. So I feel like I have been put in a position of authority where I'm overseeing all of this, and I could step up and be an ally even before that person becomes an employee of us. And it's not calling it out negatively or saying, hey, look, we're the best place to work and equity is important. It's really, are we assessing individuals and making them offers that are comparable regardless of what their sexuality is? And, from that aspect, you can then become an advocate for individuals. And that's extremely important, because if we don't have advocates who are looking out for us on our behalf, then there's lots of opportunities that you could miss because of that.
Yeah, that's great. So, for you, Michelle, it sounds like, that trait of a good ally is somebody willing to step up when, that maybe that party or that person's not in the room, right? How are they advocating for them? I guess, Lisa, would there be anything else that you would add as a trait of a good ally?
The one thing that just stands out to me is just always having respect for every single individual that you work with.
Yeah.
Whether that's in a meeting, that their presence is at the table with you or not.
Yeah. And that could be something as simple as noticing someone, regardless of male, female, or their cultural difference. If they're spoken over, taking the time to just pause and say, "Oh, we accidentally spoke over you. Please complete your sentence." And a lot of times that goes a really long way in creating an environment where everybody feels comfortable and confident being themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm curious if you could expand on how you model that behavior. It sounds like Michelle and Lisa, but how you get maybe your colleagues or managers to actually, also model that type of behavior. What's an action item there for the people on the call?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I am in the fortunate opportunity where I have about 30 managers, maybe 32, that report up through the executive that I support. So I have a lot of opportunity to coach and mentor and grow people. So for me personally, I like to take the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with them. There are also areas or opportunities for us to speak as a group. But typically most of it happens in the one-on-one coaching sessions and just organic conversations. And this is one of the reasons why I miss going into the office so much, because you can have a 10-second conversation with somebody at the elevator waiting to go downstairs to get your lunch, and you can find some really insightful information. I've recognized people, I call them on the ledge, about to leave the company. Maybe something is bothering them, and just having caught them in the right moment and taking the time to listen, or maybe invite them to my office later on or at a different moment to explore or have a conversation about whatever their issue is, has in several occasions kept them from opening the email that would have brought them to another opportunity outside the company.
Yeah, that power of being in the office and having those one-on-one conversations. We definitely all miss that for sure. Well, I want to spend some time before we go into Q&A really talking about networking, which is the fourth component of this conversation that's super important. So, to both of you, what is networking and the power of networking that y'all have experienced?
It's connections.
Yeah.
And it is interesting, we connected in a third world country, even though we both are STEM ladies, and even though we both worked in high tech and all of these other things, but we found a connection there. And I think we can connect with people on so many levels. We can have our work network, like our inside the company that we work with network. We can have our, what I call kind of whatever we're passionate about network. Maybe it's supporting a cancer charity, or maybe it's Meals on Wheels, or maybe it's Habitat for Humanity, but you find people that share other interests. And it's always interesting to me, the connections that you make in that regard. You might wind up with a network of people that you like to exercise with, or a network of people that you love to share the best practices you have learned in books and those sorts of things. So I think keeping an open mind to having multiple networks really adds a lot of variety. And I think it allows you to help other people connect with other people too. So I am a huge advocate for networking beyond the borders of an office, and particularly during this pandemic, it's become, I think, perhaps a little more challenging to network unless you're willing to get on Zoom and you're willing to, have yet one more Zoom added to your day to try to meet someone new. And maybe you normally wouldn't have accepted, I don't know, an invitation from someone you don't know on LinkedIn to have a 15-minute Zoom call, but it could just wind up leading to a connection. And if not, then what have you done? Maybe you've wasted 15 minutes that you didn't have to spare. But I think networking is really connecting with the goal of giving to your network, because then you'll be able to take. A lot of people, I think, just want to network and say, hey, I was really hoping that you could get me connected to Tom because I heard Tom could get me this job. And then I meet Tom, and Tom, could you please introduce me to Sally because I want that job? Well, that is not a proper way to network, and that network won't last. But if you look to network as to what you can give into it, it will grow. And I think it will bring huge rewards to you.
I agree. And the one thing that I would recommend that people do is not limit themselves to the industry and they're in. Had I been closed-minded like that, Lisa and I never would have hit it off. And there's a lot of synergy and intersectionality between biomedical and the engineering work that we do, or the analytical work that we do at SAS. So being open to cross industries, and believe it or not, you will be able to help people. For example, just me answering, I think it was a LinkedIn connection, Missy, with you guys, just being willing to share the resources that I had at hand in giving you guys like the Dale Carnegie information or things like that. If you're just open to having a conversation with somebody, regardless to what industry they're in, you may find that there are opportunities that come out of that you would have never expected.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And Michelle, you're, someone that we've networked with that just like opens up the book of opportunities for us. And so, on that point, someone that's more on the receiving end, what advice do you have for someone like me or someone on this call that feels like that's what they're doing is taking? How do we really self-evaluate on how we can give back to that networking relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you always, like Lisa said, go into the relationship or the conversation as how can I help you, then naturally when there's an opportunity for somebody to reciprocate, typically that happens. And I can just use Lisa as an example. I mean, there have been so many opportunities she's been able to point me in just in keynote speakers. And we had an amazing keynote speaker that came for International Women's Day by the name of Carla Harris, just a phenomenal individual. And I would have never had the opportunity to meet her if I had not been open to, Lisa's network. So just don't feel as though you're always taking, and don't have that mindset going in, like, what can I get from this individual? Because it's really a two-way street. And I think you'll be more fulfilled in the end. Also, if you could be mindful of how you can grow that ripple in the water. So as we were talking about, Lisa's network plus my network is 70 years that we could offer to somebody else. If you always have that mindset in who and how can I help, then things just kind of always seem to work out in the end.
and there are always opportunities. I'm sure there are other companies that you will be able to share the knowledge with because you're ahead of them and what you're doing.
Mhm.
So I think it's not necessarily just giving back to Michelle, but it's paying it forward.
Right.
Mhm. Yes. Well, thank you so much. That was really good feedback. Have you found yourself networking in any unusual places outside of Zoom lately?
Outside of Zoom, you know,
I found myself networking last year at the beach, which I have never done,
yes,
but I
yes.
did find myself networking at the coast, which was just, I wasn't setting out to intentionally network, but I developed a whole network of contacts at the coast that have been interwoven into other aspects of my life. And
Yeah.
they really were kind of two separate aspects that, and then networking more than just because I worked at home for the last 2 years, I would alter my hours
Yeah.
so that I'd be out walking when more of my neighbors were walking. So just meeting new neighbors and having more than a wave as I'm driving by to go to the office, and they might be out walking their dogs. So it's been a little bit of those, other than the Zooms, I would say those are the two places.
But yeah, being able to work remotely from any location has kind of been nice. I would say that prior to COVID starting, I was not very cognizant of my remote employees, and now I am. And we had a couple individuals on the leadership team who, for years and years, had been dialing into a conference call and trying to participate as best they could. But of course, once COVID hit, my eyes were completely opened, and never again will I go back to not using a camera or opening the meeting in a way that everyone can be participative regardless of where they're located. It's actually opened my eyes to quite a bit of opportunity for advancing relationships, even at work.
100%. I think, go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting you say that. I just finished a book 2 nights ago, and it was saying one of the greatest ways that you can show that you value your colleagues, your employees, etc., is to know things about them personally, like if they have children or if they have
true.
pets or where they got their degree. And it was just making some really good points about, and I think when you said that, Michelle,
Yep.
Zoom has been the perfect time when you see the dog walking across the
Yes.
background, or you
the
hear
cat
the
or
dog,
kid,
or
kid in
yeah,
their
the
underwear.
kids like going through, squirting something, spilling something,
Yes.
instead of ignoring it, just saying, oh, well, how old was that little one? Or, doing something personal. And it was just really interesting and highlighting, as we have been more isolated, making sure that we invest in what community we have. And if that community is Zoom, then try to get it a little more personal.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now I've made it a point to not let anyone apologize for the screaming kid or the child that comes up that wants a snack or needs help with the homework. You don't apologize. Turn your camera off, turn your volume off, and do what you need to do. And those are the sounds of life. Those are the things that we need to all embrace. And I think it's truly helped me understand and get to know my colleagues on an even deeper level that we never had before. There have been quite a few blessings in disguise, I guess.
Yes, I agree. Blessings and silver linings of COVID, and
Yes.
talking about mentorship and sponsorship, that's all about, like you've said, relationships and connections. And that's how we connect, is, getting to know people on a different level than how we see them at work.
Yeah.
Well, this has been incredible. I definitely want to carve out some time for the audience to ask any questions. We can use the chat function, or if you just want to unmute yourself and ask a question of Lisa or Michelle. And I also have a list of questions people sent in too that I don't think we'll get to all of them, but I'd love for the audience to be able to ask their questions first.
Sure.
Well, I can, I'll kick off a question, and then if anyone has one, they can drop it in the chat. But Lisa, you know, I see the book in the background, Remember Who You Are, and it sounds like you just finished another book last night that I'd love to hear more about. But what does that mean to you, and what does it mean being yourself to you, and why you wrote the book?
Well, it means being true to me. We're all wired differently, and all too often we try to improve our weaknesses, which are still going to be our weaknesses. Whereas if we take time to reflect and determine what our strengths are and work on our strengths just a little bit, we can become best in class in those areas. And then use that to figure out what our brand is, because our brand is what we are known as, which means what is it that we value? What are we passionate about? What do we excel at? And so remembering who you are is really about making sure your brand aligns with you, making sure you're true to yourself. That means living out your priorities, which means no is not a 4-letter word. When you say no, it means you're saying yes to your priorities. And then it means taking the best of you and paying it forward, whether it's by mentoring, whether it's by community involvement. It is really about just working on being the best you that you can be. So does that?
Yeah, no, and that's some of the best advice Lisa ever gave me is and year over year in industry, they make you document like the things you're going to work on to make yourself better next year, or of all the things that you've done this year, list the good things and the bad things. When you can stop focusing on the bad things and really hone in on the good, and I wouldn't say bad things, when the things that recognize the things that you're not quite as good at, and pull in team members who that is their strengths. That has been instrumental in helping not just me, but my team succeed, because together we fill each other's void and are that much stronger. So that's one of the, over the last 9 years, one of the things, stop focusing so much on the things that I perceive are negative and just continue to sharpen the things that are positive.
Right. Too often it's easy to compare.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start thinking, oh, well, I wish that I could have a brain to work at NASA. Well, okay, that's not going to happen. So instead of doing that, let's see what I can do. But it really, when we compare, it's either going to lead us to a pity party or it's going to lead us to be prideful. So why don't we work on what it is that we can do well and compete with ourselves to do better in an area that we excel in, rather than just honing in on what we don't do so hot.
Yeah, I think, you know, as a mom, we want to be good at everything, and we really push our children like to excel in the things that they're great at, and we don't expect them to be great and perfect in everything. So I think it's good advice to reflect that back on ourselves and just hone in and excel on those strengths that we carry. So thank you for that. And then Michelle, you know, you have so much experience and passion for supporting women at SAS and in the STEM and local community. What really ignited that passion?
You know, yes, I would say early on, really early on, I was 17 years old when I accepted the opportunity to work at NASA, and I quickly recognized the fact that I was literally the only female. I mean, there was a secretary that we were converting from non-technical to technical because they had a little program for that, but there wasn't anybody for me to look up to go to ask advice. So I started doing what I can to help change that. And I started really, really early by going out to middle school and high school and just inspiring young women to consider STEM related careers. And that has been a huge passion. And by now there's some person out there who her story probably starts with this crazy woman from NASA or IBM or SAS came to me and gave me candy, because that's part of who I am, and told me about how what I'm doing in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade could translate to a career. And, you know, there's somebody out there, I'm sure, whose story probably starts out like that now.
That's a huge impact that you've made in your community. And I'm sure there are a lot of stories out there. It's really inspiring, all the work that you do, Michelle. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions if anyone wants to unmute themselves.
I see Jessica.
Jessica.
Yeah. But I can't hear her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, okay, great.
Hey, Jessica.
Hi, nice to meet you. I had one question. I know you two are 2 successful professionals, and I always am curious, you know, what you do for time management. A lot of the stuff we talked about, I feel like I always want to prioritize it, but it falls in the lower bucket of my priorities. So just wanted to get an understanding of, you know, your best practices for time management and your priorities.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
Well, if I can reach behind me,
She's got.
I
some
didn't
good
know I was
examples.
gonna have this, but I usually keep on my desk or somewhere nearby. Kind of, this is a Waterford crystal heart, probably not so easy to see. And I try to go through and categorize what is truly important to me in that bucket with it is like a crystal ball, because as you said, Jessica, we all have way too many things to juggle. And sometimes it's the things that fall down that maybe we wish that they hadn't. I then have my next level of things that are important, and it's a glass ball. And I won't take the time to go into all of those, but the important point is I also try to categorize rubber balls, because if I drop the glass or the crystal, the things that are my highest priorities, they're going to shatter.
Yeah.
But if I drop a rubber ball, something that really might seem to be important to me, if I am juggling all these bizarre time things, we just convert them to different objects, the rubber ball is going to bounce right back up in my rotation, and I'm never going to miss it. And so I really try to ask myself in my list of priorities, what is going to matter tomorrow? What's going to matter next week? What can I delegate? What is part of who I am? Like, say, my top 3 values or my top 3 priorities. And then if it's a crystal ball, that means other things have to wait or be said no to or be delegated to others, because there are way too many things seeking our attention. It means in some seasons, I haven't exercised as much as I do, but with Zoom and AirPods and all of that, well, I take conference calls with clients who also like to exercise. We'll set up an hour-long call so that I can do that. Or I check on my mom while I'm preparing dinner, because I can cut and chop or do whatever. So for me, it was finding things that really reflecting what is the most important thing that I can be doing with my time, and focusing on doing it, and then letting the other things sit. And they're plastic balls, which means you drop them out of your juggling rotation and they sit, and you pick them back up when you're in a different season of life.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I've known Lisa long enough to have picked that up from her as well. I mean, you also gave me a crystal heart that sits on my desk, and it's a continual reminder of making sure that I prioritize the things that are most important to me, and aligning yourself with the individual that you report to is probably a good idea. So making sure your priorities in terms of work align with theirs is the only additional tip that I would give.
Yeah, a wise man once said, when you put second things first, you lose both first and second things.
Yes.
So it's a matter of, it might not be comfortable at first to say this is a priority, so I have to do this now. But over time, people come to expect that from you because that's who you are. It also means everybody's emergency does not constitute an emergency for you when you have other priorities. So you can probably tell I have a soapbox on that. It's a great question, Jessica. Was that helpful?
Yes, very helpful. I love the metaphor.
I agree that crystal ball, rubber ball, plastic ball, that could deserve a whole nother section, which I'd love to hear more about. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have come past the hour, and I just want to thank you both so much for joining us today. I have so many key takeaways. We'll definitely be sending out the recorded session to this. If anyone has any questions that Lisa or Michelle you'd like an answer to, you can email them directly to me, and I can connect with Lisa and Michelle to get a response. So thank you both for your time. We're incredibly grateful to have you. I hope everyone has a good day.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Lisa, Michelle, bye.
Yes.
Bye.